Hello and welcome to this interview with Dominic, who is a former undercover police officer, and we're going to be talking about both your experience in the police as well as perhaps how you might change the modern police, because of course we have many criticisms of the way the police work here at Load Seaters, and I think it'd be nice to hear from someone who has actual experience working within the police, because of course none of us have actually done that. So,
Okay. Well,
thank you very much for coming, first and
thanks very
foremost.
much for having me, Josh. I'm quite looking forward to it.
That's good. So, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your background, first and foremost?
Yeah, I mean, my accent's from Manchester. It's a Manchester accent. That's where I did my growing up years on a council estate, which was a poor area, poor families. Everything was on a slot meter, the gas, the electric, the TV. TV was rented. Police were on my street every day, either going through somebody's door, somebody just got out of strange ways, going to visit somebody in strange ways. It was a busy old place like that. Big families. I was a family of 5. There was families of 10 on the same street. No cars. Played football in the street. Knocked about with a bunch of lads. What we call a gang, but not like the gangs they have nowadays. They're not, there's no knife.
It's more of a group of mates, right?
Yeah, a social group of mates, yeah. Yeah, and just get up to, petty stuff really, nothing too heavy, but often have a little brush in with the law in those days, but nothing too heavy.
It's the kind of normal stuff that every lad goes through, isn't it?
Yeah, well, did on our estate. I've met people since that had a better upbringing than I did, richer upbringing. There's a lot of, there's a lot of domestic violence in my house as well, my mum and dad, so, that was just normal to us, it wasn't something I had to deal with and had psychological issues about it, or have since. It was just how it was.
It's strange because quite often, I know this from the research as well as just anecdotal experience, if you just see something as normal, it doesn't have the same negative consequences psychologically.
Correct,
and it's something that people forget, that actually, as long as you viewed something as normal at the time and wasn't cause for upset, then you can be well adjusted and fine. There's no.
I think later in life, I've been nothing like my parents were to my children. So although I accepted it as normal then, as I grew up and I got educated and I got wiser and older, I realised that wasn't normal, and my kids didn't suffer what I suffered or see what I saw. So, yeah.
Yeah, so do you think that, because you went into the army before you went into the police, do you think this sort of career helped you out from the background that you had?
Well, the army career?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, without doubt. I mean, I left home, I left Manchester on the 11th of September 1973, 16 years of age, left home. I can't imagine any of my kids leaving home at that age, how are they going to look after themselves? But I had no hesitation. I left home, got a couple of buses and a couple of trains, and I went to Harrogate, to the Apprentice College at Harrogate as a junior soldier. And that was a massive, massive turning point in my life. I had my own bed to sleep in for the first time in my life at 16. I got a set of clothes that nobody had worn before. They hadn't come from my cousin. They fitted me. We all looked the same, but we all had, a new set of clothes on in the army. And I got 3 square meals a day. I couldn't believe it. I was first up for breakfast. You could, and the evening meals were huge. So yeah, so that was a big thing, having that. And I wasn't very well educated when I left school. And I got in the army, and 2 things. I knew how to get educated if I wanted to get promoted and get on. And I learned that I could be educated. I wasn't as thick as I told I was, or I thought I was. And I applied myself. I found the structure, the discipline in the military suited me down the ground. Got myself educated, got promoted. I was a sergeant at the age of 23, proper sergeant. So I was like, from your 18th to your 5 years, and I was loving it, absolutely loving it. And I came in as a street smart kid. I was pretty much street smart, growing up in that environment in Manchester. I got into the military, and I got that book smart. That's what I say. I was street smart, then I got book smart. Had a great time in the army, 13 years. Never saw an angry man. Nobody shot at me and I didn't shoot at anybody. And I was sort of in there during the sort of troubles in Ireland, sort of. I went in 73 and I come out in 89, so, you know, and I never even went there, I never even got sent to Ireland. Lucky old me, eh?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
But I know that particularly today, there's lots of, I think it's become much more of a problem that young men don't really have any direction in life. They feel like there's not really any means of them making something of themselves. Would you suggest that they perhaps join the military?
No.
No?
No, stop right there, no, I wouldn't. The army doesn't want to recruit troublesome recruits. They want volunteers, they want people that want to be in the army. They want them in the army because they want to be in the army. None of my kids have been in the military. You know, they've got direction and purpose in life. You know, for me, it suited me because I didn't have that. As a kid, I didn't have it. My kids, you know, I wouldn't say I drummed it into them, but, you know, I told them education's a great thing. Get educated. All my kids went to university. All did really, really well and doing really, really well in life now. So, no, I think the army should recruit people that want to be in the army, not take people out of society that perhaps need stern, strict discipline.
Mm-hmm. Or as my dad would probably put it, a kick up the arse.
Oh, yeah.
Quite often refer to me in a similar way, but then...
I've heard that said a lot about not being kicked up the arse, about, you know, these hooligans, these tearaways, put them in the army for 3 years, you know. No, you know, the army's professional. You know, it doesn't want to be a Borstal or a remand school or a young offenders centre. It's an army, and they want people that want to be in there, not people that have been sent there.
No, that's fair enough. And obviously you went into the police after that. What was your main motivation for doing that?
You know, a lot of people ask me that because of my upbringing, where I grew up. Nobody joined the cops from where I grew up, right? Nobody. But as I say, I moved away when I was a kid, 16. Took myself out of that environment, put myself into a really good environment, put myself in the military, and I took everything I could out of it. But somewhere along the line, somewhere in my DNA, it was either there or I picked it up. I wanted to be a cop. And at about the age of 28, 29, I applied to join the police and sat the entrance exam, which at 16, I wouldn't have passed that, I wouldn't have done it. Did the entrance exam, had the interviews, and got accepted by the police. A lot of the kids I grew up with, because I'd go back to that area, because I still got family around there, not on the same council estate, but, you know, I'd go to just put my head in the local pub to see who's about from my era. And I'd see the guys I knocked about with, and no word of a lie, they looked just like their dad looked when I was a kid. They sat at the same bar stool, at the same bar, drinking the same beer that their dad did years before. And they weren't hostile towards me, but once they knew I was a cop, that was it. You know, the bond, if there was a bond there, bond was broken then. You know, I'd gone across to the other side.
Must have been quite difficult, though, I imagine. It at least would not be pleasant that people that you grew up with and you have...
I'd left it behind, Josh.
Okay.
You know, I'd left that behind. I'd seen that there's a better place out there. There's a better world out there, a richer world. You know, more to discover, more to see. And then, you know, some of the kids I grew up with, have, you know, never been outside of Manchester. I don't imagine they got passports or anything like that because that's just how it is. The streets are different now. When I go there, there's like cars parked in the street. There used to be cars when I was a kid. Yeah.
It's quite interesting to me that you just felt compelled to join the police. Was that because you think your experience in the military, it was quite translatable and therefore you felt a certain affinity for it?
What happened in the military with me, I was promoted very early because you used to get promoted on merit, tempered with seniority. And I must have been doing all right because it was like on merit, 23, no seniority there. And what happened was there was a blockage in the promotion system because you can only have so many sergeants, staff sergeants, W01s, W02s. And if you're W01 and you're going for commission back in those days, you couldn't be commissioned until you was in your last 2 years of service. So your last 2 years of service was the age of 38 to 40. So these guys, one guy, a couple of guys that I knew were WO1s at the age of 32. So they were holding those posts up for like 6 years before anybody else could get in. So they changed it around. They changed it to seniority tempered with merit, the promotion system. And I fell between the tracks on that. So I was like a sergeant at 23. At 28, I think I was just coming into the bracket to be a corporal. You know what I mean? So I had a long way to go before I could get promoted to staff sergeant on that system. So there was that. The majority of the army in those days was stationed in Germany, BAOR, British Army of the Rhine. And we were there in West Germany, and the Warsaw Pact was in East Germany, and we were all waiting for the first shot to go off, which thankfully never happened. So I didn't fancy going back to Germany. I'd done a few tours in Germany. And this thing I say about like my DNA about being a cop, all that was running around at the same time. So I thought, right, I'll apply for the police, because, yeah, and I did it, and I got in, yeah. So there's a few things. There was the Germany thing, the promotion thing. I was probably getting a little bit stale and bored because I hadn't got any further promotion because I wasn't qualified for it.
Okay, so moving on to your work with the police, I imagine you didn't start immediately on the undercover work.
Oh, yeah,
I imagine they had you. I imagine they had you on the beat to begin with, didn't they?
So I can't remember how long the initial training course for the police was. I want to say about, is it 16 weeks or something? It's a long time. And you all go to a police training school, and we'll come back to this. So you're all there. You're all wearing uniform. So I'm used to wearing uniform. You march around in little squads. I'm used to marching around in little squads. You take orders. I'm used to taking orders. You work off your initiative. And there's so many transferable skills that I had to take into the police. So got to the training school, and then I got to my first police station where I was going to work. And not that anybody had looked into my file and said, oh, we'll put him on this council estate. I got put onto a council estate, not dissimilar to the one I grew up on. And that's where I learned that phrase, like shooting fish in a barrel. It was, I could just relate to them. Not only think like them, but I could talk to them at a level and a language and use words that didn't offend them. They understood. And I got on really well with them. I got on really well on the council estate. And through that, I became a good thief taker. That's what they call somebody that's pretty good. I'm always in and out the custody block with somebody there for some crime or other. And you're dealing with sort of bulk crime, car thefts, shed breaks, burglaries. You're not dealing with the heavy stuff. You're not dealing with robberies and rapes and murders and things. You're dealing with that sort of bulk crime that just happens every day. And if I didn't have to nick somebody, I wouldn't nick them. I'd use that discretion. And through that, I'd gain some respect, gain sort of dialogue with them. And then they would give me snippets of information. So I was then cultivating informants. And I was going in and with information on good criminals from good informants. And I got to the notice of CID, obviously, because I was bringing all this work in. And first opportunity you get to go onto CID, if you're showing a flair for that, because in your first 2 years, you do 2 weeks on traffic, so you can experience that. 2 weeks is enough for me. And 2 weeks on different departments, and you do 2 weeks on CID. So I'd done my 2 weeks on CID in this 2 years. And I was a mature guy, don't forget. I wasn't a 18, 19, 20-year-old young man coming into the police. I was 30 years of age. And by the time I got onto CID, I was like 35. And I got a lot of life skills, a lot of life experiences behind me. And people say to me, oh, my boy's looking at joining the police. I say, well, how old is he? Well, he's just finishing his degree, or he's just finishing his A-levels. Come on to degrees as well. I say, well, no, get him to go out and just work. Go and do something. Get some life experiences. Go and do another job somewhere.
I very much agree with that, because I think that actually there's a lot of pressure, particularly at schools to get people into something just so they can tick a box and say, okay, well, we fulfilled our obligation of getting so many people into so many industries or getting them to university. Whereas I think actually it's far more healthy to just get your head down and work for a while and figure out what you want to do once you've fully developed as a person. Because I think back to when I was, say, 16, and what I wanted to be was entirely different to what I wanted to be in my like mid-20s. And I think that perhaps the delayed onset of people having a career and things like that isn't always such a bad thing, because then people might make a better choice. Because I think there has certainly been an extended infancy in a lot of younger people just by merit of their situation, in that it's more difficult than it used to be to get a house and get a well-paying job. And it means that people are living at home effectively the same as they were when they were a teenager. And I think it predisposes people to behave in the same way because they don't have the same obstacles to overcome and develop their character effectively.
Yeah, well, I got onto CID really quickly, and I was bringing good work in. I was getting good collars, nicking good people. And once I got on the CID, I wanted to get onto the regional crime squad, as it was then, later the national crime squad, and now the National Crime Agency, all the same thing. And I wanted to get on that. And I had no interest in promotion. I had no interest in going on firearms because I was handy with firearms, having been in the military. A lot of people ask me, why don't you go on firearms? Not for me, and I've done all that. I want to do something different. So I got on to, applied to join the regional crime squad. And the funny little story here was all these informants I was running from, just picking up jobs. I got a real good quality informant, really good. He was a quality villain, and he was a really good informant. And I was like going to meet him at service stations and places like that, where you're just anonymous side table. And I'd go there, have a meeting, maybe take somebody else with me. Always took somebody else with me, there's always two of us. Get back, do a contact report, put it into my DI on my area. And about 2 days later, or after one of these meetings, I got a message that the DI of the regional crime squad wanted to speak to me. I think, wow, that's where I want to be. So I went in there, and great guy, and the DS that was with him, another great guy. And the DI said to me, he said, did you have a meeting 2 days ago at the service stations on the motorway? And I thought, oh no. And I said to him, do I need the federation in here? You know, like the union. He said, no, it's nothing like that. He said, let me tell you. He said, I think you had a meeting there with a guy, and he called him by his name. He said, because an hour later we had a meeting with him as well, and he gave us some information. He said, so what I'm saying is, we can't both run this informant. One of us has got to step down. He said, we're quite happy if you want to run him. Well, tactically I thought, well, I want to be working for you. I want to be on this squad. I said, you have him, boss. I said, he's far more your calibre than he is mine. And you deal with the information you brought in, they dealt with it. It was at that level. It wasn't sort of local policing level, national, international level. So yeah, I gave up my informant to this DI, and then I thought I've got to get on to, I want to get on the regional crime squad. And first time I applied, a lot of nepotism in the police, right? First time I applied, the job was already given to somebody before he went out on an advert, because it was somebody's mate wanted to get on there, and I didn't have any mates on there. So I applied, went through the interview and everything, did all my research and sleepless nights, and had the interview. And I had a great interview. Although I say that myself, it was a good interview. Right?
You can always tell though, can't you?
Yeah, sold it, yeah.
You can always get a read of both the interviewer, and you can just feel how confident you are in what you're saying. And I think that's always a good indicator, isn't it?
But the nepotism, the job was already somebody's name on it. And he got the job. He could have had the worst interview in the world, but he would have got the job because of this nepotism that existed in it. So I didn't get it. I don't know, maybe 6 months later, less than a year, because the crime squad offices were all over the place. And as a vacancy came up, and it's made up of detectives from all different forces, all from the sort of southeast corner of England, another job came up in a different office, and the DI, who I'd given informant to, who had interviewed me for the first job I applied for, who didn't give it to me, called me up and said, "You want to apply for this one? I'm going to put a letter on your file, on your application, about your previous interview." And so my name was on the job then, right? So it didn't matter how good the rest of them was as far as I'm concerned. But through my own merits, right? Through my relationship, wasn't a historic friendly relationship with the DI. It was a professional relationship. So I got it, and I got the job, and I got onto the crime squad. And that is where you're dealing with the top echelon of organised crime in this country. The top 2% of the 5%. You're dealing with them, the untouchables, the ones that have gone through the system and not been dealt with and got themselves to the top of the tree, top of the pile, with an organisation below them, untouchable. And it was just a case of somebody come into the branch office, put a file down and say, lock them up, get them locked up. And that was it. So we started working on that, and then I started seeing undercover work, and more covert work, more probing and more intrusive surveillance and deployment of undercover officers. And I just thought I could do that. And then I applied for, I think it took about 18 months. It's a laborious, I'll go through if you want, the selection process. You want to hear it?
Go on then.
You can edit it out if it gets too boring. Right, so I don't know where the advert comes from. I can't remember where I heard they were looking for undercover officers. And it goes out nationally, all over the UK.
I take it they're recruiting from pre-existing
police officers,
yeah.
All police. Generally, I wouldn't say always, because I don't really know, but they're all detectives, right? And they've all got good experience behind them. Well, by the time you get on the course, you're in amongst the sort of, supposedly, the top sort of detectives, cops that want to be undercover officers. So they advertise nationally, and then you write in, and it was all controlled by, in those days, it was all run. The Met, the department in the Met, SO10, had the grandfather rights on undercover policing. They'd ran all the training courses. They were the portal to all the different organisations that you needed to obtain backstopping material, driving licences, passports, etc., bank accounts. So they owned it, because they invented it way back. So you apply for an application form, and then look at your request for an application, because you've done a little bit of a pen picture on you there, and you can be binned at that stage. No. If they like you, they send you an application form, and I always describe it as an Argos catalogue, blank Argos catalogue, and you've got to fill it in. And they want to know about your career, your home life, your private life, your previous history, what you're doing. And as much information, interesting information you can give them, the more chance you've got getting through a paper sift at that stage. Somebody might look at that and go, or they say, yeah, we'll invite him down for an interview. So you go regional to start with. Your interviews are regional. So I don't know how many people applied in the first place, but you have regional interviews. I don't know how many people are on now. And that's in front of 3 very senior officers, detectives, in your region, in the southeast region. And there's 3 of them. One asks you questions about you. One asks you questions about the law. And one gives you scenarios and puts you in situations, and you have to talk your way through what you would do. And that gets quite hostile, that gets quite heated. At one point I found myself leaning across the table at this bloke. So I was saying, well, I've done this, I've done that, because every time you shut a door, they just open another one. Then if you get through that, I can't remember the correct order now, you go forward to a national interview then. So all these people from all over the place are all coming in, hotel in Middle England somewhere, and you get another interview by 3 further senior officers. And I mean very senior officers. I had the head of NSIS on mine. That's the National Criminal Intelligence Service in London. I had the boss of SO10 on there.
What's SO10?
Oh, the SO10's that unit in the Met that had the grandfather rights over undercover
Okay.
policing, sorry. Can't remember who the other guy was. I think he was, he might have been the head of one of the regions, National Crime Squad. These are guys that use undercover officers inside out, backwards, forwards, all day long. So you have that, and if you get through that interview, you then go for psychometric testing. And that's like a couple of days up in London. Crazy sort of process you go through there.
There are lots about psychometrics, believe me.
You might want to explain it to me after this interview. Because I always remember the first question, it was a booklet, right? And I didn't even know how many questions it had in it. And they give you the booklet and they talk you through what you've got to do, and there's an example question on the first page. So they make sure you've got the process by just checking. I got it wrong. I was only walking in the room. I got it wrong. They were in a good start. So then I opened up the booklet, and it was, you might be able to explain to me why they did this to me. Right, so the booklet, the first question was 3 brand new housing estates, all with different size houses and different value houses and gardens and driveways and garages, all different specs. And then your list of buyers who had their requirements, what they wanted, gardens, garages, drives, 3 bedrooms, and their budget. And you had to list which houses they could buy. So it wasn't rocket science, but it's, like just picking the stuff out and saying, yeah, you can buy on this estate, or this estate, and you can buy this house. So I did that, did the first one, turned the page over for the second one, and said, put your pencils down, finished. I didn't even know how many questions was in the book. There was 5 questions in the book. The second question was about a train line, all different stations, A to whatever it is, A to H, different tickets, different requirements for travelling passengers, whether they want season tickets, day return. So
I think it's just a measure of your reasoning ability, really, by the sounds of it. It's given you more or less puzzles to solve to see that you've got the...
like assimilating the information down there and sort of extracting, like you would if you was, looking at an intelligence folder on an operation or something, just that's what I've sort of attributed it to. So I did all that. Then there's questions like, ticky box, have you ever stolen anything in your life, yes or no? Like a pen.
Who's going to say yes to that, like, to be honest?
Well, have you ever stolen anything in your life?
I don't think I actually have, no.
Well,
I'm not just saying that because the cameras are rolling. I've just always been principled.
I ticked yes.
Did you really?
Because he'll ask you the same question, I think, later on in a different format or something. So, and I say to people, if you're going to do that, if you're going to do the psychometric testing, just be honest with it. Because I suppose they want people to be honest as well as be able to tell lies as an undercover cop.
I suppose it would be difficult if you'd been like perfectly moral, and it might make you look suspicious. It might make you look dishonest if you're just ticking the ones that it looks like you are trying to, or you're trying to present yourself to live up to the expectations of the person who's given you the questions.
Yeah.
So I can see how that would work. Yeah.
So we do that. We do the psychometric, and then you go on the course. Now, by the time you get to the course, I think they're on 1 or 2 courses a year, right? Maybe 2. There's only 12 students on it. So from all these students that applied to start with, there's 12 of you in that room. And although I was been in the police 10 years then, so I was quite junior in service 10 years because people have a 30-year career. But I was mature, and I got these life experiences behind me, and I got a lot of skills as well behind me that I'd picked up from the military that were useful to being an undercover police officer. Not killing people, didn't have to shoot anybody. So I get in this room with 11 other, I think there's 2 or 3 girls, and the rest of us were guys. And I'm started thinking, these are the best of the best, right? This isn't. Put myself in that bracket as well, to get into this room, you've got to have something special about you. And there's no political correctness on the course. There's no HR department. If you ain't cutting it, they just tell you go. And it's not, they're not sitting in an office all pink and fluffy and say, look, how do you think you're doing? And all this, that. So just pack your bags, this ain't for you. and you go. And I think on my course there was 5 of us at the end, 5 or 6. 2 of the girls, and the rest were boys. Yeah. And then that's it. You're qualified then, and that's probably taken, I don't know, a year, 18 months or something like that to get
So
through
it's
that.
a ridiculously thorough process, but necessary, I would imagine.
Very necessary, because when they first started doing undercover work, they sort of get a guy and say, do you fancy going undercover? No training, no law input, no psychological support, no welfare support. It was just, you fancy doing this? You think, well, this sounds quite sexy, I'll go and do this. You haven't got a clue. Well, they didn't have a clue, at least with me. I'd had training, and there's welfare support, there was psychological support. There was cover officers, that was your first point of contact between the operational team and you as the cover officer, who was another UC, worked in the undercover world. So I had all that, whereas back in the day they didn't.
Okay, well, would you be able to tell us a little bit about perhaps one of your favourite, or there's probably not the right word for it, but one that you perhaps would be most keen to share of your cases?
Okay. Right. I mean, I don't know how many jobs I did, right? I'm not being child of big potatoes there. You don't count them. And sometimes you're doing 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. You might be a bit player on one job, like supporting the main UC on a job, or you might be acting as the boyfriend and with a girlfriend, boyfriend to support another operation. You might be the principal, lead UC on a job, so you're in and out and you're bringing people in to sort of make you look real. You got to have friends. You got to have stuff. You can't just be you. Nobody else on the planet knows you. So some of the walk-on bits are quite funny. But when people say, ask me about UC jobs, I always go back to one that's in the book. In the book Undercover Legends, about a Italian guy who was a really, really good fraudster. Really good. Big money fraudster. I'm not talking, running a credit card. This guy was big international fraudster. And he'd done time. He'd done his time. He'd got out of prison. He was here in the UK. And he got mixed up with a couple of other fraudsters who were muppets, right? They weren't in the same league as this Italian guy. And he got himself nicked again with these two. And long story short, he's getting interviewed. After the interview, he says to the cop interviewing him, could we do a deal? He's going to offer him a bribe. He senses that. He goes to his boss, he says, I think I've just been offered a bribe here. His boss, who was a career detective, thought, right, we'll take him on this. Got onto his undercover unit and said, is there anything you can do with this? Within 2 hours of him being in that interview room, I was getting a phone call at home with the famous words, do you fancy a bit of work? You always say yeah. You always say yeah before you even know what it's going to be. You say yeah. And I played the role of a corrupt police officer, as far as he was concerned. A corrupt DS that could make the evidence disappear out of the evidence locker. So no evidence, nothing to present in court. Police have messed up. He could walk away. That was going to be the scam. And he was going to pay me £50,000 for doing this. Something like that. A lot of money. Came in 2 lumps. So we make arrangements to meet the first time with sort of phone calls from phone boxes. And he's really, really careful. He's really sort of wary of me. Because I'm a police officer, right? Although I'm saying I'm bent, he's got this touch of the seconds about it. So I go meet him in a hotel, coffee lounge, and he's not there at the time given. So I phone him up. I said, where are you? I said, I'm in the hotel across the street. I said, well, I thought we were meeting here. He said, I'm just watching if you're on your own. I said, mate, you got 5 minutes to get over here. If you don't come, I'm going. So he came in, no words, just nodded his head at me. I said I'd be stood by this big rubber plant or whatever it was in the reception. And he nods his head that way towards the gents. We go to the toilet, and he pats me down, makes me take my phone apart and everything. And we go and sit down, and he's really, really cagey. We go and sit down, and he won't speak, he's just nodding and shaking his head like that.
I suppose that's so it doesn't get picked up on any audio recording, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but we had a surveillance team in there as well, videoing him, I guess. But he won't speak. Oh, he's very reluctant to speak and very cagey because he don't trust me. And he said, let's go for a walk around the car park. So we go for a walk around the car park. He says a little bit, but he doesn't say enough. And he says, I want us to meet in a sauna, just me and you in a sauna. Really? It's very hard to hide recording equipment when you're in a sauna, isn't it?
I imagine that was probably his thinking, right?
That was exactly his thinking. So anyway, we arranged to meet at a leisure centre, and we get into the locker room, and he gets in the locker opposite me, cubicle opposite me, and I'm in this one. And he makes me strip naked in front of him, right? And he strips naked. Then after throwing my swim shorts, and he throws me his, and we check them all out. And so then we go into the sauna, but there's somebody in there, so he won't speak again. So we go into the swimming pool, and we stand in the swimming pool with the water up to our necks, right? So it's just our heads on the surface. And he runs his story out. He tells me exactly what he wants and how much I was going to get for it. I haven't recorded it, so it's uncorroborated, right? That's what they say. It's not corroborated. It's my word against his. So again, you're thinking now, how am I going to get this? I've got to get him to speak to me. But you've got to be careful on questions you ask suspects, because you're a police officer, right? And if you're going to ask somebody a question about an offence, you're meant to caution them. And if you did that as a UC, you'd have one job, wouldn't you? You'd be back on the beat again. So he won't. He runs a story out in the swimming pool. Get all our clobber back on together, and I said, right, we'll go and buy a couple of throwaway phones from the supermarket, Sainsbury's, and then we'll sit down, have a chat, sort out how we're going to use the phones. And that's what we do, because he's now thinking the phones, and we're talking about that. And I've got all my stuff back now. I said, right, let's just go through it again before we part from here. And he did. He went through exactly what he said to me in the swimming pool. Boom, got him. So that was good. So I'd outfoxed him there, because he was really, really cagey. When we come out of the hotel the first time, I'd arrived in a CID car, right, Ford Escort. It was plainly a police car, a plainclothes police car. He come out of the hotel and I said, what? It's like a cop car there. I said, it is, it's mine. It's what I've come in, you fool. He really was a cagey sort of geezer, really cagey. So we could go away. I've got everything I need now. The next meet, he's going to give me half the money. And then once I've got that, I was going to go away and he wanted a passport, some bank accounts, a laptop, various bits of evidence. He wanted a load of money as well, which was always kept in a safe. It doesn't stay in the evidence locker. It's more secure. Anyway, so we arrange. He gives me half the money then, but he's back on the cagey stuff now. We get back out in the car, and he's nodding at the glove box, like that with his head. I said, what? And I open the glove box, and there's a carrier bag in there with 20 grand in or something, whatever half the deal was. So there's 20 grand in there. So, he's really, done enough now. But he wants this stuff. And we arranged to meet at a hotel to do the handover. He's going to give me the rest of the money, and I'm going to give him his stuff. So, the night before the meet, schoolboy error this is why I tell the story, because you might think you know everything, or you get a little bit cocky or overconfident, and I certainly was on this. So the night before I go to the hotel, just to have a look at it to familiarise myself with the lounge there, the coffee lounge. And I go in there, and the waitress, nice girl, woman, not girl, woman. And because I'm chatty and all that, I'm sort of like giving it all the banter and this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. And what I've done is I've put myself on her radar. Next time I go in, she's going to remember me because I'm the chopsy Mancunian. And I think nothing of it. I go and I'm staying in a different town, not far away. Come the next day, go in the coffee lounge. The operational team are using a bedroom on the 6th floor or something to run the job from. And I'm in there getting my briefing and doing everything. And he phones me. And as I pick the phone up to talk to him, the phone in the hotel room rings, the guest phone. And I start looking at this, somebody rips it off the hook and, doesn't speak, thank God. And I said, where are you? I said, I'm at the hotel, where are you? He said, I'm just round the corner, I'll be there in 30 seconds. Shit. I said, I'm like on the 6th floor of this hotel. So I tell the story in the book, it's funny. I come out of the hotel, and the signal to nick him that I've got what I need, or we've got enough evidence now, is I put my jacket on. As soon as I put my jacket on, the arrest team that's sat around drinking coffee like members of the public would get up quietly, arrest him. So he says he's 30 seconds away, and I'm like, shit. I'll have to get down there. So I go running out of the room, put my jacket on. Can't remember if it's jacket on, jacket off, whatever it is, when I got to send the signal to arrest him. Then I go to the lifts. I think, I can't go down the lifts because if he stood outside the lifts. So I take the stairwell and run down the stairwell, and I get to what I think's, the ground floor, and I open this door. I'm in the beauty salon. It's like all these women having their nails and their hair done and everything. And I thought, I look at them. Bearing in mind, I've got a tape running at this time now. I'm going, morning. Walk out. They've got a street door out onto the street and come back in through the front of the hotel. And he stood there right by the lifts. And he says, like, I'm trying not to breathe heavy. I can't think if it's jacket on, jacket off. What am I going to do? He says, he asked me, he said, where have you just come from? From across the street. I said, I've been watching you come in here, see if you brought anybody with you. Same thing he played on me. And so we go through the lounge, and he won't bring the money in, right? I give him the passport as a teaser. So, yeah, here's your passport. He said, the rest of it's in my car. He said, where's your car? I said, it's close by. I said, where's the money? He said, I've got the money in my car. I said, well, where's your car? He said, it's in the underground car park in the apartment block he lived in. I said, well, go and get it and bring it in here. No, I said, I don't want to do that. He's still, not 100%, because I'm a cop, and, he's going to go to prison again for a long time.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to bring money to a deal either, does it, as far as I understand? Because, of course, if things go wrong, if you really were a dodgy copper, you could have just, I don't know, arrested him, buried him in the woods somewhere and taken the money and not done the job.
Well, dodgy copper there. So he won't bring the money in. And he said, right, what I'll do is, I said, I'll go and get it, put it on the front seat of my car, you can see it, and then I'll go with the underground car park. And you think, right, I know how to do surveillance, go on surveillance training. I'm thinking, the arrest team can't come with me into an underground car park. But I can't tell him that. I've got to think of another reason why we're not going to do this. And I say to him, I said, no, we're not doing it. He said, why not? I said, well, I get in there, you've got your two big heavies with you. You say to them, take that stuff off him. And they take it off me. Maybe give me a clump. I said, what do I do? Call the police? That doesn't work, does it? He won't do it, but I've got enough. So I stand up to put my jacket on. It's the same waitress is serving tables, right? She's not let on to me. That was the schoolboy era. She's not let on. I stand up, put my jacket on, and I can hear a scuffle. It was just, movement behind me where the arrest team's going in for him. And they take him away. And I go upstairs, do all my notes, my exhibits, everything else. And I come downstairs to have some dinner in the hotel. The waitress is there, and she's the woman. She said, that was very interesting before what went on, wasn't it? I said, sorry, what do you mean? Yeah, the chatty chap wasn't chatty anymore. Yeah, so schoolboy errors in there. A bit of humour with him stripping me naked. Honestly, I couldn't believe it. But so cagey. But at one point he said, it might be a trap. And again, I turned it on him. I said, well, this could be a trap. I said, you could be working for, Panorama, doing one of these disclosures on corrupt police, and you just suck me in. How's it going to look, me coming out of a sauna, a swimming pool, with you? How's that going to look? And that was quite a short job as well. It was only, I don't know, maybe 4 meets altogether and phone calls. But they're just quick in and out jobs.
Mm. It might be a good point to mention that is in your book, isn't it?
Yes. Let me say, there you go. Undercover Legends. And it's not legends as in a legend. A legend's story, your background, who you purport to be. So this book here, Undercover Legends, by David Lacourage. That's the pseudonym I used on this book. And it's about me and a female UC called Sam, and I'm Dom in there. And there's about half a dozen jobs or so that we sort of did together, or did one together. She did one there, and I did the rest of them. Yeah, there's all sorts in there.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed listening to it. So I listened to it on Audible. I found the difference between the tone of the book and the quite prim and proper guy narrating it quite funny. Cause
Yeah. He does when he does his Italian accent. Yeah, it's very good.
But no, I find all of this fascinating because you don't hear about it ordinarily. You see the news stories in the media, but you don't, by merit of the work itself, hear about the details of how it happens and actually learning about how these things work. It's kind of amazing that you can do it in the first place. Like the amount of work that goes into it, all of the research, all of the people involved in the operations, and then you can actually pull these sorts of things off.
Well, it is. Like I said, way back in the day when it first started, there was nothing, right? They went on the street with nothing. They just pretended to be who they were. There was no backstopping. They had no, like, I deployed, like, you have a pseudonym, you have a long-term undercover legend, who you are. And in that legend, you would have all the documentation that you have. You'd have a driving license, bank accounts, passports. I had web pages, I had a website, I had email address, I had everything, and I looked real. But you would never offer that up. You would never offer up in a job, because once you've exposed it, it's gone. You can't use it again. So you have to change it. I think in the 15 years I did it, I had 3 long-term legends. So undercover legends. I had 3 legends in different pseudonyms that I used. I used moody names when I was just bit player, walk on, walk off. But if I needed something, a credit card or a bank account or a driving license, I would get that. That would be made available to me. But way back in the day, they didn't have any of that. So it was far better structured. It was probably better structured today than it was in my time. We got well looked after.
On the topic of how things are different in the past and now, one thing that you did mention is how you actually spoke to people when you were on the beat, on the estate. You spoke to them in their own language, and I think that's something that I think police are being encouraged to move away from a little bit, or at least that's an unintentional consequence of how they're training them now, in that there's all of this sort of formal bureaucratic language, and you basically have to be a lawyer to understand what on earth they're on about. I mean, I don't spend a lot of my time outside of work talking to police officers. I'm quite well behaved, thank you very much. But I'm friends with a police officer, and the way I've seen him make arrests off duty, and the kind of switch between him when he's talking to me as an old school friend and him in his sort of professional mode.
Exercising his authority.
Yeah, it's very, very different. And I think it would actually be better if there was a greater similarity, because then it's far easier to see the person you're talking to as just another human being like you. And I think that it would get a lot more respect and perhaps even empathy from the people you're talking to.
Yeah, it's back in my day, to be a police officer now, you have to have a degree, right? So let's get that one out of the way. I'm not against people with degrees. As I said earlier, all my kids have got degrees, and they've been very successful having that level of education. So because I ain't got one, I'm not kicking off about it, right? But you've got to have a degree to be a cop. Now, I don't know how many or what the percentage of the public that have degrees in this country is, but let's just say it's 50%. So 50% have and 50% haven't. It might be 60-40, it doesn't matter. There's a percentage of people that don't have degrees in this country, excuse me. Now, the police come from society. The police is society. The police is with consent, and it represents society. Well, it doesn't anymore, does it? It only represents 50% of society, because 50% of the people can't apply to be one. Well, you can. I mean, I think on my first shift, on the first shift I joined at the first police station, say there was 10 coppers, right? Imagine that 10 coppers going out on a shift, you know, a couple of panda cars and some foot patrols. Remember them days when that happened? Right? Say there was 10 coppers. I can think right off the top of my head now, Army, Navy, RAF, female RAF, Army. So there's 5 I can think right off the top of my head. They were ex-servicemen. Maybe had done 3 years, 6 years, 9 years in the services, or 12 years in my case. But they had those life skills. They had that military experience. And, you know, I'm not talking military, aggressive military. They were level-headed individuals. They were people that are able to diffuse situations through talking, not through throwing a rule book at them or just nicking them, because that's the default in it, right? Well, you nicked. Oh God, you know, the amount of people I used to take to, you know, deal with when you first start, you deal with people's domestics. I grew up in a house full of domestics, so it was easy for me to walk into a house where him and her are going at it, verbally and physically, and you know, and rather than take him up to the nick, because it's always the bloke that got pulled away, right? It's always the bloke. And
I've actually spoke to a lady called Deborah Powney, who's an academic who studies domestic violence, and she was saying that actually the prosecution and the services available are disproportionately weighted, and actually quite often it's women that are the ones that initiate domestic violence and things like that. But the disparity between the two is that basically the default is to arrest the bloke, even if quite often he's the victim. I mean, of course, we live in a society where men aren't supposed to hit women, and I very much agree with that, by the way, just to clarify.
And me. No, seriously. Yeah. I mean, I saw my dad hit my mum. It's not a pretty thing to witness as a child.
No. But I think the presumption is that it's quite often the man, and there's a bit more of a complicated situation there. There's a series of events that have led up to the police officer stepping through that door. I think sometimes it's...
That like unconscious bias, is it like that?
Well...
Thinking it's always going to be the man, isn't it?
I don't know whether it's an unconscious bias. It's always difficult to discern what's conscious and unconscious.
You know bigger words than me, I know that.
And I also studied
I know you did.
This stuff. I actually wrote my undergraduate dissertation on unconscious decision making. So I do know my stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
But I think more often than not, it's more that it's someone's presumption. So that can be either conscious or unconscious. It doesn't necessarily matter. It's just what they're coming to expect out of a situation that they know very little of, isn't it? And they go in there with preconceptions, and quite often they may shape how they approach something. But then I'm saying this as someone who's, you know, never been involved in any sort of policing. So this is only my sort of speculation as a psychologist rather than someone who's actually got on the ground experience. So I'm going to be a bit more hesitant with what I say.
Okay, so we were talking about being a police officer today, wasn't it? So, so you got to have a degree. Or you can come in with a degree, or you can come in and enter onto a 3-year course to get your degree. Or, and this is the one that kills me, really kills me, you can come in to be a detective, right? You can come in and you're on the detective training course or whatever it is straight away with no...
That strikes me as a bit strange, because you'd think that you would have some on-the-ground experience of policing, wouldn't you, before they become a detective?
Well, you've heard my story about me as a cop and being on the council estate and me military skills and me, you know, street smart kid and just dealing with stuff. You know, if you're working on the hosiery department of Marks and Spencer's and you finish on the Friday and on Monday you're starting as on this degree detective course. Well,
you have no frame of reference, do you?
Well, where's you getting your experience? You know, what are you falling back on? What are you referencing? I don't know. I just don't know how that works.
I think I think it's an approach that is common in a lot of the world now, that you can be taught to be competent at something rather than just getting some experience and becoming good at it.
Yeah, see, I think a practical job like being a cop, I don't think that fits that. I don't think that.
Yeah, I very much agree. And I think there are lots of things that you can't be taught and you have to experience. And it is something that I think we as a society need to overcome, this belief that teaching is the be-all and end-all. And I think it is connected to that fact that lots of people go to university now and they occupy lots of the jobs that dictate how things are managed. And that's not necessarily ideal, because you have a specific set of people who have gone through specific experiences that shape how they view the world.
Yes.
And of course, when you're in education, you have the view that, well, I've been taught lots of things. I've spent a lot of money to hear these people who...
And read all these books.
Yeah.
And,
and therefore they presume that because that's worked for them to get them where they are, then that's going to work in every situation, when I think it's actually a case of experience trumps being taught things.
Not only police, but there's lots of jobs out there that you can't go into cold. You've got to have a background in it. You can't just go in cold. And police, to me, because I know about it, is one of them. So, like that shift I initially spoke about, my very first shift, 10 officers, 5 ex-military. They're not getting ex-military people in now, right? So they're not getting these self-disciplined, able to work as a team member, able to work alone, take orders, understand orders, be forceful, all the things, wear a uniform. You're not getting those people now, because I wouldn't have come out of the army at 30 and thought, right, I'll go and do a 3-year degree course in the police. As well as doing my police job, I've got to do my graduate studies at the same time. It's not, they get days, a couple of days here and there to do their studying. It's not, they're doing an 8-hour shift and then having to come back and do a paper on something or other. They do get time off to do it. I'm still in touch with a couple of people that actually are involved in training recruits in different police forces, just through my network of former colleagues that I've worked with and what have you. So I get to hear all this and some of the stories, and I don't want to kick the calibre off these people coming in, right? I don't want to do that. But I think the recruiting process is wrong, right? And because that's wrong, they're bringing the wrong people in. They're not weeding out the ones that shouldn't actually be police officers. Now, I read or heard, I think it was in a podcast, that when I joined the old bill, people joined for 30 years. It was a career. I had a good pension at the end of it, and it was a 30-year career. I brought my army pension in, which was 12 years, which brought me just under 10 years in the police pension scheme. So I only had to do 20 years as a cop to get a good pension, and have a good 20-year career in there. There are figures out there. There might not be exact these, but to get 30 police officers through their 2 years, they have to recruit 100 because of the wastage rate. Now, who's running that budget? Because somebody wants to get hold of them and give them another job, because that is a complete waste of taxpayers' money and local authority council tax money, because you pay in your council tax towards the police. And there's loads of that budget is getting wasted on training the wrong people, because they're not going to come out the other end.
Yeah, any private company that would run under those same principles would certainly not turn a profit had they copied the same methods there as the police.
I was having a conversation with an old colleague of mine, and I had to ask him to explain what he just said to me. He said there was a course of 32 on this call, 32 recruits, and there's 12 left. I said, 12 have gone already? He said, no, we've got 12 left. All right, so 20 odd of them have gone. And this is like about a year in or something like that. Crazy. But so the recruiting, my humble opinion, the recruiting policy model ain't right. And the calibre, the sort of people are going for. I've heard stories about they didn't expect to work weekends. They don't. What do you mean I've got to work nights?
What, like it's an office job where you work 9 to 5 because that's when all the criminals are doing their business, is it?
And I'm not saying that for impact. That is there are actual events that have happened. I was talking to one of my GMP mates a couple of months ago, and they were doing an event, a concert, something like that, in the Manchester area, and these cops got given their areas of responsibility. You know, stand on this corner, stand here, stand there, whatever. And at the end of the night, there's a cop missing. Where's he? And it's like panic then, you know, somebody nicked him, has he been kidnapped? He'd gone home. He got bored and gone, he just walked off the job. And now I'm not making that up, right? In fact, I got told that by a bloke that's still serving. He just went home. But one guy, his dad came in, or a girl, because he or she had to work a birthday. He wouldn't give the day off. Honest, I mean, so, you know, I started this by saying I don't want to knock the calibre of people applying for the police. We need police officers, but we're not getting the right section of society now. We're not getting.
It's not necessarily the fault of the people applying, though. It's the fault of the people designing the system, and I think it's fair to criticise them because they clearly don't know what they're doing.
They don't have face-to-face interviews. Yeah, everything's done over Zoom now. Teams meetings, and then you got me going on my pet subject here. When I went to training school, I explained to you before, when I've said this bit, I'll shut up, right, I promise you. When I went to training school, we all wore a uniform. It was a police training college, right? It was all police buildings, police bedrooms, police canteens, everything, right? Police. Up and down the country, these people are going into universities to get their police training, right? So they can't wear the uniform, they've got to wear civilian clothes. And when they're doing their scenarios, now when I did my scenario, sometimes you have to arrest somebody and they don't want to be arrested and you have to use your handcuffs and things like that. They can't be doing that in their scenarios up there, can they? If they can't wear the police uniform. So for a start, they're not used to wearing the police uniform because they're in the civilian clothes and they're doing mock arrest scenarios where you might have to use handcuffs or, God forbid, CS gas or a taser or whatever, I don't know. Yeah, so I just think it's gone so far. I find it incredible. I can't believe it, half what I hear.
I've certainly heard some unusual things, to say the least. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But yes, there are plenty of things. Particularly, I think what I have heard is that you get these short, sort of 5, sometimes even like 4.5 foot women on the front lines to back up a bloke, and it's no fault of the woman's being put in that situation necessarily. It's more so that there are physical realities to policing, aren't there? That you could be dealing with, I don't know, someone sort of my height, over 6 foot, spends all their time in the gym, absolutely massive, and no matter what that woman does, she's not going to be able to restrain that man.
That's where she's got to be able to talk, right? That's where this kicks in. I've always had that ability to talk myself out of trouble, with undercover and in normal police stuff as well. But yeah, being able to talk to people, but I can talk to people because I've got life experiences. You know, I can relate to people, and you know, if you're taking a 4'6" graduate, putting them in that situation, I don't know. You know, don't get me wrong, I've worked with some tremendous female officers. Brave, courageous, professional officers. I've worked with men of the same calibre. I've also worked with women that weren't quite up to the job, and I've worked with men that weren't quite up to the job. So there was that mix in there, right? There was a fair balance in there. And you know who you could trust, you know you wanted beside you, you knew you wanted to help you on an investigation. If you were doing surveillance, you knew, you went to the right people. And then they started getting rid of, nepotism. Can I go on about this? All right, okay. So we've got this problem with these recruits and all coming in as graduates because there's no direct entry, although they have tried, for the officer class in the police like they have in the army. You know, Sanders. There's no direct entry. But what they had, I don't suppose they have it now. I don't know. They probably do. They had what they called an accelerated promotion system, right? Which was a commission through the back door. So if you came into the police and you had a degree, and some senior officer, superintendent level, area commander, something like that, thinks he saw potential in you, you would get invited to go on an interview panel for the accelerated promotion, where you would be interviewed by people of a similar nature, similar sort of background. And if you got through that, you were then on the accelerated promotion program. So that would be in your first 2 years. You do your first 2 years, you get confirmed in the rank of constable. So it was in my day, probably the same now, right? So you're confirmed in the rank. You're no longer a probationer. So you've done your 2 years apprenticeship. Those that have been starred on the accelerated promotion will take the sergeant's exam at the earliest opportunity. They're academics, right? They're bright people. And whilst they've been going through their first 2 years, they've been studying for the sergeant's exam. And the sergeant's exam is a national exam, and you get pecking order, 1, 2, however many in the country take it, right? 1 to 200. And be interesting to see what the first 50 were, if they were all on the accelerated promotion, or if, you know, some wayward individual like me got in there. Not that I ever sat the sergeant's exam. So they would then get promoted. They'd pass the exam, very, good mark, and get promoted very early. As soon as they get promoted to sergeant, they're then looking at the inspector rank, and that's another exam. So they were preoccupied when they were PCs to do the sergeant thing. They're now preoccupied whilst the sergeants to get the inspector thing, right? And then they take the inspector's exam, academics, 1 to 100, pass it, they're in the top 10 or whatever it is. And these guys are going on to be senior officers. These are going to be the management of the asylum. These people are going to be right at the top of the tree. So, in my opinion, you did have direct entry for officers through the back door, through this accelerated promotion scheme, academics. They spent a lot of their time studying for the next rank. And then once you've done the inspector's rank exam, no more exams, you then get promoted on merit and experience in the roles that you've done.
That seems... surely that should play a part in all of the processes, because it seems strange to me that you could be good on your tests and then absolutely terrible actually out in the field.
Be book smart people, but not very street smart sort of thing.
It's quite often the case, to be fair, is you either have one or the other. It's very rare to have people with both.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we've got, at the top of the tree now, you've got all these academics, who are academics, like you say, book smart people. And whilst all this was going on, up and down the country, they had what they called a tenure policy. So, all your tenure was a soft management tool, right? It was brought in for soft management because you had some CID offices, mainly, and squads, that people were there through friendships with other people in that office, that nepotism that was going on. You couldn't get them out. You'd need a small nuclear device to get them out, because the sergeant would be writing the annual report for his mate, the DC, who was useless, right? But he'd write him a good report, so that he stayed on. He didn't say, should return back to uniform. So they brought in this tenure policy, which I say is a soft management tool, because what it did was, once you'd been on CID for 7 years, you had to return to uniform. You had to take all that experience and go back down to the ground floor, back onto the shifts, and take all your criminal investigation experience with you. For the dead wood that it was brought in for, yeah, quite right, getting back there. Because they're not but you'd lost a lot of good experience, a lot of good detectives.
It seems like throwing the baby out with the bathwater a bit, doesn't it?
Totally right. But here's the thing. So we've got all these people coming up on the accelerated promotion. We've got all your experience coming down here. Where those two lines cross, that's as good as it's ever going to get. Because after that, your experience is down here, and these academics that are now running it are at the top. And that's what's happened to policing since 2009, since austerity kicked in, since that financial crash. here's a good one for you. So in 2009, when we lost 22,000 police officers between around 2009, the next few years, we lost, right? We were reduced by 22,000. Don't believe this government verbal that we're getting an additional 22,000 police officers. You're not getting additionals. You're getting replacements. You got rid of them in your.
They do this in lots of areas where they will cut something and then reintroduce a certain number and make it sound nice, and sometimes it will be below what they cut in the first place.
No, this since 2009, 22,000 cops, right? That's a lot of police officers. Now they're going to bring them back, right? They're not going to get additional. We're not getting 22,000 additional. We're getting replacements. We're getting them back. We're going to be at the same number as we were 14 years ago. Yeah, and with a different crime pattern as well. Different stuff going on now that wasn't happening in 2009. So we've lost 22,000 cops. They're going to bring them back. Where are these cops going to hang their coats when they come to work? Because the police station that was where I live is now a block of flats. It's been knocked down and they built, a nice block of flats on there. Where are these guys going to? Where are they going to go to work? They share office space in fire stations, some of them. Well, in police stations, you go in the intelligence office, and there's pictures of, wanted or most prolific offenders in the area and all that. You can't put them up in a fire station, and all the firemen come in. He goes, who's not been vetted and anything like. Mind you, it don't look like they vet the cops anyway nowadays, does it? So yeah, that's the first thing. Where are they going to hang them all? So 2009, 43 police forces in England and Wales. 43 chief constables, 43 deputies, and they generally have 2 or 3 assistant chief constables, and then perhaps 2 civilian ranks equivalent to ACC, generally finance and personnel, right? So big clump of senior management there. So in 2009 we had 43, right, chief constables, police forces, and we've lost 22,000 cops. You know how many police forces we're left now out of 43?
Well, you've told me already.
I've told you that.
Yeah.
We've still got 43. We've still got 43 chief constables. We've still got 43 fiefdoms, kingdoms, where these chiefs and their deputy chiefs and their assistants all sit. 43. So these 22,000, I think he was I'm going to say, well, I won't say what force he was, in case I get it wrong, but chief constable of one of the busy big forces, not a metropolitan one, in this country. When he left some years ago, said, the way things are going, this UK police will end up with all chiefs and no Indians. And I tell you what, he's dead right. He's not far off the truth. He's dead right. It's, I despair.
Because even in my lifetime, I've noticed that you don't see nearly as many police officers on the beat, on the ground, as you used to back in the day. And it is from about 2009, as you say. So I think you can actually just anecdotally notice the impact of the cuts. And it is a good way to disincentivise crime if there is a police presence. And also it helps with the community as well. I remember when I was in school, we actually knew the name of our local police officers. They would come in and talk to us and give us lessons about, don't talk to strange men, that sort of thing. And I don't think they have the numbers to do that sort of thing, because it meant that you could walk past them on the street and you know their name. You can say, hello, such and such. And because I grew up in quite a small area, the southwest, I can walk past a police officer and I still say hello and how you doing and stuff like that. And quite often it takes them by surprise.
It does, yeah.
And it's just strange that in a relatively small space of time, an entire sort of ecosystem around policing has changed.
Well, they brought in the community bobbies, didn't they? Blunkets bobbies, as they were called. And they were going to be high visibility police on the streets, around your estates, around your town centres. They wore high visibility yellow tops. You don't see them anymore, do you? They're now driving the panda cars around. I believe they've had their powers increased so they could, whereas before they couldn't nick anybody. I think, they've got certain powers now. I don't know don't know what they all are, but they've got these certain powers. But they were brought in to give the police a higher presence. But because they got rid of 22,000 of them, these community bobbies are now doing the bobbies' jobs. They're doing the cops' jobs.
Yeah, and there are a few other questions that I'd like to ask about the state of modern policing.
Right.
And what sort of things do you think that the police shouldn't be involved with? Because there are things that I would pose that things have gone too far, but it might be a case of it being political pressure rather than being the police hierarchy itself. Things like going and cautioning people about, oh, you've said some nasty things on Twitter and that sort of thing.
Okay.
I would be inclined to say that that's probably a waste of both parties' time there. The police officer could be doing something better with their time than saying, oh, you're saying mean words on Twitter to people. That aren't necessarily even unlawful. You've got things like non-crime hate incidents where someone perhaps criticises someone on Twitter for normally about politics, and then it will be spun into something that it's not, and then for some reason the police will be involved, and then they'll have this non-crime hate incident logged against their name, which isn't, of course, a crime, but it still comes up in advanced background checks. And it's not even that they've broken the law, but it's still something that's going to affect their career. And things like that strike me as completely unreasonable for everyone involved, really.
Yeah, all right. In short, no, the police shouldn't be policing that. The platform providers, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, they, together with a department, call it a government department if you want, government department should then police that. It's not for let them deal with that. Let them have the powers to, like Facebook took Donald Trump off, didn't they? Just took him off, right? He didn't get a caution, they didn't get the police involved in it, they just took him off, right? So they can take people off, they can do that. If they come back in a different guise, you've got this department that can then deal with it. I mean, the government have departments for dealing with all sorts of rubbish. I'm sure they can bolt it onto a department that already exists, or move people out of a department that ain't really that busy doing whatever they're meant to be doing. But yeah, I think, police it, but not with the police. Use the providers and use a separate arm, body, department, call it what you want, to deal with that.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, with the limited resources they have, it is somewhat of a waste of time for everyone. And I don't agree with policing what people say anyway, unless they're, shouting fire in a crowded theatre or something like that, whereby, they're causing trouble or inciting violence. Those are exceptions. But I think that there is an element of politics in this as well, and political pressure. So I am sympathetic. I have heard from police officers, and they're just like, I really don't care what people are saying on the internet. It's not really any of my business, and it's a shame that I have to be sent to these jobs because no one really benefits from it. And at the very worst, you should just be saying, oh, maybe you shouldn't be saying this, but
Exactly.
you shouldn't be then recording these things down as non-crime hate incidents that have implications for the person that have said it.
Yeah.
But there's actually, it comes to mind, our very own Connor out there that you met earlier. He was at the Conservative Party conference, and he was having a bit of a debate with one of the protesters outside, all very civil. And they actually had some common ground. And he brought up, I think she's some sort of sociologist, but a terrible person. He described her as insidious, and the person he was talking to agreed with him. She's like, yeah. And a police officer overheard their conversation and came over and just like, you can't be using language like that. And I think he was going to try and charge him with a public order offence, but nothing came of it in the end. But
Ridiculous.
yeah, and it's things like that are going on.
See, what I'd like to do there is that police officer that intervened there. Just have a look at his back. Let me see your background. Let me see your CV. What have you done? Or how long have you been a police officer?
he looked more like he would be comfortable at HMRC than he would in a police officer's uniform. Let's just say that.
Yeah, okay, you can say that. I couldn't comment on that.
No, I don't expect you to. But he didn't look like the kind of bloke that you typically imagine when you think of a police officer. And just have a look at what other questions I've got. Here's another one that's obviously, if you don't want to put your foot in it, you don't have to answer this one. But what are your views on police carrying things like firearms? Because I have seen videos of police being injured when their tasers don't work, and you don't have the same problems necessarily when you shoot a bullet. It's not a matter of the bullet not working. The bullet works as long as it comes out of the gun, whereas sometimes the taser, well, if it does nothing to the person, or you might get a fault.
This is interesting, right? So when I was a uniform PC, right, I had a little pouch on my belt with some handcuffs in, and I had a piece of wood down the lining of my trousers, which is called the truncheon, and that was it. And I had my mouth, right? So that's all I had. I didn't have gas, tasers, extendable metal batons, and they go out now. It's like Batman. It's like the utility belt, they've got so much on there, right? So for a start, they've got all this stuff. Do I think UK Police PLC should be armed per se? No, I don't. And I've worked in other countries as an undercover police officer where they are armed. Most of Europe, I think all of Europe is. Every country I've been in, they've always got, quite funny when you go to a briefing and they've got all the guns on the table. A bit different from our briefings. But there are a lot of guns out on cop guns on the streets. There's, armed response vehicles. You go to an airport now, every cop you see is carrying a gun, right? So we do have a lot of guns out there. Commonwealth Guard and Bobby on the beat, no, they don't have them anymore, do they? Your Commonwealth Guard and Bobby in a panda car, police car, my police car, don't have guns. Back in my day, if there was a firearm incident, there was AFOs, these were Bobbies you work with, your colleagues, but they were trained firearms officers. They'd go to the police station, open up the safe, get out a Webley 45 or whatever it is, stick six shells in it, spin the barrel, and that was your firearms response, your initial immediate firearms response. There was obviously a higher tier beyond that. So, I don't think cops should be armed. Tasers, well, I've never fired a taser. A gun's a lethal weapon, right? If you point a gun at somebody, it's got a bullet in, you pull the trigger, and it kills them, you've murdered them, or if you've done it in the line of duty, you've neutralised them, right? So that's what a bullet does. A taser's not a lethal weapon, right? So you fire a taser, per se, it's not a lethal weapon. If somebody hits and bashes their head or has an heart attack or something, it's not designed to kill somebody. It's designed to sort of incapacitate, restrain, and you can then deal with them. So tasers and gas. I got in fights, right? So when I joined up, you're sorting people's domestics out, and you're outside the nightclubs and the pubs on the high street, police presence when the pubs are tipping out and the nightclubs are tipping out, and people urinating in the street or raucous behaviour or screaming, putting a bin through a window. You're going to get nicked for that, right? Having a leak in the street. Somebody might just deal with you verbally with that and blah, blah, blah. But then if somebody went to nick somebody for having a piss in the street, and they don't want to get arrested, right? Most drunks don't want to be arrested.
I think that's fair to say, yeah.
So you end up scuffling, and there's generally more of them than there is of you. So, and like I say, we didn't have any gas or tasers. I think back in my day, that would have escalated it if I was to sort of pull a taser out and adopt a firing stance or squirted me gas at them. I don't know. But they use it. They all have it today, don't they? I think they all use them. So
I've certainly seen more armed police around. I think it's more of an anti-terror thing because I've seen them in things like shopping malls and places like that that might be good targets for a terrorist rather than anything else. So I think they have the dedicated firearms units doing that sort of thing, and then the regular police are dealing with other things usually, don't they? So I can certainly see what you're saying here. But my motivation for asking the question was that I think particularly because of people like Sadiq Khan ending things like stop and search, there's an increase in knife crime and things like that. And there are ways of dealing with that other than arming police. And I very much agree. But it seems like, well, if this is off the cards, then if this is politically unacceptable that you're having stop and searches because supposedly it's somehow racist to stop people and search for knives, then you've got to keep people safe somehow. You can't just say, well, it's all right, we're just going to have more knives on the street, because at that point, aren't you just giving up on policing?
You know, you can apply that to, like, drugs. You know, should we decriminalise cannabis? No, don't. Right? Okay, it's a revolving door, right? But it's a door. It's a barrier of some sort, right? If you just take the door away and there's just an open space for them to walk through, they'll walk through it, because there's no deterrent. You know, so don't stop and search. Don't legalise, decriminalise cannabis, because the next thing they'll want to decriminalise ecstasy, right? And that's the Class A drug. So it's all coming down. Everything will come down at a level before you know it. I mean, Canada, I was over in Canada over Christmas and New Year, and there's an area by the ice hockey arena and the football where they're going to have the World Cup, and called Hastings Street. And it's just a no-go area because the police took a liberal, non-enforcement attitude to drug use. And the street, now you can't walk up the pavements, all the businesses, all the shops are shut down. It's on the edge of Chinatown in Vancouver, which used to be a vibrant area. That is spread into there. And you've got people living in tents, gazebos, shelters built out of pallets and tarpaulins, and they're having fires and they're burning themselves and, you know, dying in fires, and they're just off their heads on drugs all day. And they're now taking a softer approach to heroin and crack.
And these are the ones that do the worst damage, isn't it, as well?
Well, the drugs. Those
As
drugs.
in, yeah.
Dirty drugs, yeah. The dirty drugs. I've never known anybody go straight onto heroin, right? They've always had a bit of weed beforehand. You know, they started on the softer drugs.
I mean, you could argue that everyone has a pint of booze beforehand as well. I mean, there's always something. I mean, I know that I've got no on the ground experience, but I've always been a little bit hesitant of the gateway drug argument. But anyway, do carry on.
Well, that was it.
Okay, never mind.
It's just taking this, you know, liberal approach to the rules and that we all grew up with, whether it be drugs, whether it be stop and search. You know, I wasn't the best of kids, right? I wasn't the straightest runner when I was a kid, and the police used to exercise their powers over me. I never complained about that, right? Nobody on our estate complained about it. They weren't going down the police station or on the media saying, you know, the police are on our streets and they're, you know, antagonising. They were there because they needed to be there, because we weren't the best behaved kids in the world, right? We needed the police there. And you saw a policeman, right? You didn't back chat. I'd say you back chat. You probably give a bit of lip, but
you'd keep it relatively respectful.
You would. And you knew him, and he knew you, right? He knew you, and he knew where you lived.
And I think that's the part that makes the difference, really, isn't it? Is having the familiarity. Yes, exactly. So my final question before we run out of time is that what's your knowledge of corruption in the police? Because there have been a few stories recently of police taking bribes and things like that, and I think you mentioned such a thing in your book, at least in a cursory way. Do you think that that's something that's changed as well? Is it worse? Is it better? Is it just the same? Or is it a difficult thing to establish, really?
Right. My view on police corruption: kick it out, kick them out, get rid of it. I've gone up against corrupt cops, and I've been the victim of corrupt cops on one of the operations in that book, which was a drugs operation in London, heroin buy. And the bloke that was setting it up through his informant was a detective sergeant of the drug squad. He was setting up his own jobs to get his own kudos, to nick the villains supplying the drugs. wouldn't have been his informant. His informant would have been on the pavement on the day. The people supplying the drugs, the people buying the drugs, so they gets the money, the drugs, the sellers and the buyers. Wow, what kudos that is. You know what's wrong with that? Asian provocateur. He set it up. He's the guy that's going to go to prison. And quite rightly he did. There was I think it was called Donland, John Donland, who was on the payroll of OCGs, a particular OCG, and he was selling makes, models, colours of cars on surveillances. You know, and if we went out behind a particular target, he knew we were there because Donlan was in a position where he could see. He had access to all the operation and stuff that was going through. So I've been had over by corrupt cops. I've been had over by bad police management and other law enforcement agencies, and we'll just leave it there with that title, other law enforcement agencies. So yeah, so on the real police side of stuff, talking about real corrupt police officers, and I've come across a few, really have. Then there's been a lot of bad press about undercover police officers forming relationships with females, having children, having long-term relationships with them.
The most famous case is that animal rights group, wasn't it, where the guy married one of the people he was meant to be keeping an eye on and had a child with her and then just disappeared.
Well, there was a Kennedy Stone, Mark Stone, I can't remember which was his pseudonym. He was, I think Kennedy's his real name, Stone was his, he went public, went on the television about it, and right, I'm going to make a big difference here. They're not like undercover cops. What I did, what me and my colleagues did, we investigated, infiltrated, and locked up criminals, people that were breaking the law, people that were importing drugs, people that wanted people killing. Crimes. We were investigating crimes. These people, they came out of the special, what's it called in London? Demonstration squad in London, right? That's what they started off with. And they were there to infiltrate these organisations, Combat 19 and things like that. Might not have been them in the first instance, but it evolved and they started in then investigating or infiltrating protest groups, right? Not criminals, the protesters. And I'm not saying they didn't commit criminal acts when they were protesting, like cutting wire and things like that, this, that and the other, but they weren't career criminals, right? Now, the undercover officers that went in there didn't have the same rigorous selection that I went through, or the same rigorous course, or the clue, when you're an undercover police officer, the clue's in the title, undercover police officer. You're always a police officer. So you've got the same rules, Police and Criminal Evidence Act and statute that you have to work to, and other stuff on top. I made sort of comment about it earlier about when you're infiltrating somebody and you're investigating them for a murder, you've got to be careful on what you say to them. You can't ask them a leading question. Did you kill him? So you're in the pub one night and I say to you, right, Josh, did you actually pull the trigger on that job? And you say, yeah, I did, blah, blah, blah. It's not worth the paper it's written on, right? Because I've just asked you a direct question and you've just admitted a murder. But I'm a police officer and I should have cautioned you. It doesn't work like that. So you have to ask oblique questions, indirect questions. So we have all these rules and regulations, and we have a cover officer who's looking after us. And the cover officer knows you inside out and backwards, forwards, right? He knows everything. He knows what you're doing on the job. And you're being told, specifically told, directed, instructed what you can do and what you can't do, how far you can take it. If it goes that further, stall him, come back here, and then we'll get more authorities if that's what we need. So these people were going out and living in these communities. There's one guy, I won't mention the book, there's one guy who's still under investigation for torching a Debenham store, right? There was 3 attacks. Are you aware of this? Did you know about it?
I haven't actually heard about this one, no.
Okay. There was 3 attacks on the Debenham store to do with, fur and things, fur coats and all that malarkey. And two of them failed. Two of the activists, there's incendiary devices didn't go off. The one that went off was the one where the member of this undercover unit, as they called it, that was his target. And that was the one that burned down. And he's on a knife's edge. I mean, I've read the book, and he's probably in a lot of shit, to be honest.
I would imagine rightly so.
It was
though.
millions of pounds worth of damage, millions, right? So, and then the forming relationships with females, activists, and having children with these female. I mean, how wrong is that?
Well,
There's not. I'm at a loss for words to say, but how's that police officer think he can do that?
the reason I know about it is when I was being taught research ethics at university, because, when you're a practicing psychologist, you need to know all about ethics. That was like the quintessential example of this is the most unethical you can be. You're basically ruining someone's life. They think you're genuinely married, in love with them, having children with them, starting a family, having a future, and then they just disappear.
The cop, what's going through his head? Because he's going back to his missus and his real kids,
I imagine she wouldn't be too happy about that, would she?
I don't suppose he went and told her when he went home on weekends. But, we make light of that. But how must she feel? And how are his kids, his real kids, about what the dad's done? And it's not, my dad's gone off and had an affair. As a police officer, he's more than infiltrated. He's what's he thinking? How does he think that's right? And I don't believe that nobody else other than him knew he was doing that, right?
Well, there's no way you can keep that just to yourself for years and years, are there?
No way. And there's a big inquiry came out of it, and the whole of undercover policing, I think it was called the Pitchfork Inquiry, but it's called something differently now. And I think they looked at every undercover job that had ever been run in the world, right, in the UK. And I didn't, over the 15 years, I can put my hand on my heart and say I've never seen any other undercover officer form a relationship with a female when on the plot, when deployed. Never seen it, right? Just didn't do it. It's a weak point, you're exposing yourself. I never ever saw it done. And I hear about this special unit that infiltrated these activists, and they were all at it, right? Not all of them, sorry, not all of you, no, right? There was more than one at it.
Yeah.
And people would have known, management would have known, their department, their cover officers.
They certainly would have told each other off the record.
Well, sometimes there's more than one of them with infiltrate the organisation, and so one, you can actually see it. You can see what his mate's doing, but guess what? He's probably doing the same thing. And that give undercover policing, it gave it a real bad smell to it. And I did a thing in London last year, and it was about undercover policing, but there was a member of the activist group that set up after the Stephen Lawrence inquiry was in the audience, and they asked that question of me about what's my view on police officers. It might not have been the Lawrence. It might have been, it was to do with the women, infiltrating the women. Sorry, it wasn't Lawrence. Yeah, so it's to do with these police officers, and it was very topical. Because somebody wrote a book on it. What my view was on that, and I don't know how to say. It's just so wrong. Wrong's not a strong enough word to explain what it is.
It'd even be worth calling it evil in a way, because you're destroying people's lives that haven't actually committed any crimes, effectively.
They're not career criminals. They're not OCGs. They're not gangsters, drug dealers, shooters, importers. They're nothing like that. It's like they block the M25. God, it drives you nuts when they do it, right? But they had to bring legislation in to stop them doing it because they weren't breaking the law. They were, peaceful protests. Hundreds of people outside Parliament, peaceful protests. Doing marches from Leicester Square, peaceful protests.
Well, I think we've pretty much ran out of time now.
All right.
There's so much more I'd want to talk about, but
Okay.
unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But thank you very much for
Thank you.
sharing all your knowledge. It's been really interesting, and I've very much enjoyed your book.
All right, yes.
It's worth mentioning, Undercover Legends.
Yeah.
I listened to it on Audible, did enjoy it, so check it out.
Check it out, please do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching, and
Cheers, John.
goodbye.